Hi, everyone. My name is Beth Testa, and I am a policy consultant in Washington, D.C. with the National Association for Family Child Care. The mission of NAFCC is to support and leverage a nationwide network of providers and partners in expanding and promoting the power of family child care. Our priority is to build the supply of high-quality family child care to meet the needs of babies and preschoolers and school-age children, to support working families with the child care options that they need and are counting on, and to create crucial early learning opportunities right in our own neighborhoods. I am joined today by one of those partners. I'm here with Marica Mitchell with the National Association for the Education of Young Children, and today we're going to talk about power to the profession. There's a lot at stake on a lot of fronts within the Power to the Profession dialogue, but also outside of it and in the here and now of family child care programs, the here and now for families, and in states and communities. The supply of licensed family child care is down 15% since 2011, and the numbers in some specific states are staggering. We have a lot to do to elevate the power of family child care and the importance of quality across settings, the compensation of our early childhood workforce, and the respect and the need for family child care specifically to be counted as professionals. I want to thank Marica again for helping us to dive into power to the profession. Let's start with some of these concepts of professionalization. It has real risks and rewards, too. Can you tell me a little bit about why power to the profession is different from what's come before? What does this process of professionalization look like, and what can the expected results be?
Thanks so much again for this opportunity, Beth, to have a conversation around power to the profession, and in many ways this conversation is similar to many conversations happening across the country in local communities, at the national level, at the state level, so we're in many ways what we are asking others to do. First and foremost, I think it's important to point out that power to the profession is about improving outcomes for all young children and their families, and there is no way we can do that without focusing on the early childhood profession, because it is the best and most effective way of supporting child outcomes and families. And so, again, it's about children first.
And the research is clear that the caregivers, the teachers, the educators themselves are the linchpin.
Absolutely. The most important ingredient, and I find it ironic that as we look at how states are funding early childhood education and the state of the early childhood education workforce, which of course includes family child care providers, we see a mismatch between the educators being a priority. But in order to advance and support this profession, to make sure that we have significant public funding to address the gaps you've highlighted, like compensation, preparation, and ongoing support, we're going to have to figure out how we define the early childhood education profession. There are lots of ways in which we talk about the early childhood workforce, the early childhood education profession. In some definitions, we tend to exclude family child care and make them sort of a subset of the workforce or a completely different group. There are times where we talk about the early childhood education profession, and it excludes individuals working in the K-3 space. So we know that between the different words we use, providers, child care workers, daycare, teachers in some cases, we still hear folks using the term daycare, that to make a strong, concise case for compensation supports, we're going to have to be a little bit clear about who we're talking about, and this is exactly what power to the profession is. It is us being very clear that we have to make a case to advance and support the profession, but to do so, we have to have a united and unifying identity, and that's something relatively new about power to the profession.
Yeah.
While efforts have been going on for decades to ensure that the profession is supported, this is a little bit different because it starts from a place in which we are, leading this charge and recognizing that defining the profession is critical to ensuring the success of the profession.
It depends is no longer getting us there, right?
Yeah, it's not working.
What person, what workforce are you talking about? It depends on your funding stream, on your state, on what time of day it is. that's no longer going to cut it to get our profession and all of our practitioners the recognition they need. Is that what you mean?
Absolutely, and we do that a lot. It depends on usually our answer when we're asked who are early childhood educators, or it's complicated. And you're right, it depends. It's complicated. We can no longer afford to say that if we're going to be asking for significant public dollars to support the profession. So, which is exactly why we started with the first decision being around professional identity and boundary. Something as relatively simple as what is the name of the profession, what does this early childhood education profession do in society that frankly no one else is prepared to do, and who exactly are we talking about when we say the early childhood education profession? It's exactly what we started, because that shapes the case for compensation as well as the other decisions we need to make about this profession to make sure we're all on the same page. And so what the task force proposed and was approved and vetted along with the field was that first and foremost, early childhood educators care for and promote the learning, development, and well-being of children birth through age 8, which the birth through age 8 may look different depending on your state, but we're claiming, or one may argue reclaiming, that full birth through age 8 continuum. That early childhood educators practice in all early childhood education settings, and so yes, early childhood educators practice in center-based programs. Certainly, early childhood educators also practice in home-based programs. Early childhood educators practice in elementary schools. So regardless of where the individuals practice, if they're caring for and promoting the learning and development of young children, if they're meeting the guidelines established by the profession, and showing that they have mastered the competencies, the knowledge and skills defined by the profession, they are early childhood educators. So their place of employment does not define them. It is their role and responsibilities and preparation that defines them.
But what about everyone else?
Great question. And that is true. So while we can all acknowledge that we partner with lots of other occupations and lots of other professionals in this wide early childhood education field, our role as early childhood educators are a little bit different. So the early childhood education profession, which is made up of early childhood educators, we're distinct from others in this field. So we're distinct, for example, from the policy and advocacy specialists, like Mary Beth and I. We're distinct from the children's librarians. We're distinct from the pediatrician. They're all important occupations and professions we partner with in ensuring that young children are supported. However, our identity is a little bit different, that we have to focus on defining our early childhood education profession. And in doing that, you can see that, again, to be a part of the profession, you have to meet the guidelines established by the profession, and the guidelines will be developed through the Power to the Profession process. But individuals not meeting the guidelines or professional qualifications for the profession sit outside the profession and are in the field. And certainly will provide numerous opportunities and pathways to ensure that anyone interested in becoming a part of the early childhood profession can enter the profession, but also acknowledging that there may be others who want to have similar responsibilities but are not interested in becoming an official member of the early childhood education profession, and that's okay.
So let's recap then. In decision cycle 1, we named the profession early childhood educators.
Right.
And this is really about the person and the work, not the name of the place where she or he works. So in our family child care community, then we would say early childhood educators working in a family child care home.
Correct.
I think that's really important to keep in mind. That I think a lot of our ideas, initiatives, and even funded initiatives in the States for years, it's been about the place she or he worked, right? The standards if you work in Head Start, the standards if you work in pre-K, the standards if you work in child care. This is saying an early childhood educator is an early childhood educator. and it's not about the name of the place or your funding stream where you work. I think that's really important.
Yeah, and that's something we've also learned from other professions throughout this process. The task force, as well as stakeholders, we're spending a lot of time looking at other professions to see how they're structured, and we realized that while certainly the place of employment drives specific practices, but the professional identity is outside of the place for employment. So as you think about nurses, for example, whether you're a registered nurse working in an emergency room, you're a registered nurse. Whether you're a registered nurse working doing house calls, you're still a registered nurse. And so trying to make sure that the professional identity stays with the individual and not be so tied to the place of employment.
So then the next set of decisions were about competencies. What are the things you need to know in order to do this work and have this title in the profession? And making sure we have a unified definition of what early childhood educators from birth through age 8 should know and be able to do, regardless of that setting. Can you start us off then on what's happened since? On decision cycle 345, which got combined into one, right? The task force said we actually can't talk about these things separately. We need to talk about the next 3 ideas together. Can you take us through some of that?
Sure. So, absolutely. So now that we defined the profession, and it was very clear that the profession has to master certain skills and knowledge, has to master certain competencies, has to meet the guidelines established by the profession. The next logical question was then what should they know and be able to do? And with that one, the task force realized that we have competencies galore, that there are certainly national competencies. We also looked at some state competencies and recognized that it was best to build on our current strengths, that looking at all these different competencies, the NAEYC 2010 standards for initial and advanced early childhood professional preparation programs was a good starting place. It was the only birth through age 8 set of standards for the profession, but there were also some gaps in that we had to uplift that professional preparation standard as the unifying competencies for the profession, but address gaps around how well those competencies, for example, addressed trauma-informed care or addressed dual language learners or equity and diversity, as well as looking at some of the other national organizations like 0 to 3 and the Council for Professional Recognition. Those organizations also have standards. And so that was a decision. Don't start from scratch. Let's celebrate the work that we've done and build on it to address the gap. So that document will define the knowledge and competencies for early childhood educators.
Can I jump in with one clarification? Yep. We got this question from our community, so sharing just for the benefit of all. When we talk about these standards, these are the standards for the professional and what she should know and be able to do. These are not the same as accreditation standards. So this tool that the task force has agreed to move forward with are NAEYC's standards for professional preparation programs, not NAEYC's accreditation standards. Your journey and your commitment to quality in family child care by the way of NAFCC accreditation is a different journey, and these things are definitely linked in your commitment to quality and the work that you do. I just wanted to draw a distinction. These are not about accreditation standards.
Absolutely. That's a great clarification to make.
So then 3, 4, 5.
Then 3, 4, and 5. 3, 4, and 5. Like Mary Beth said, we, as a task force, addressed the questions, the critical questions for 3, 4, and 5, which is around how is the profession structured. It's around preparation to make sure that the profession is prepared to be effective with young children and their families. Looking at the competencies and trying to figure out, okay, where should the profession members of the profession actually go to earn these competencies and what are the responsibilities of the profession, it became clear that looking at all these questions as a collective was much easier than splitting them apart. And so what 3, 4, and 5 represents essentially is the structure of the early childhood education profession.
Let's also throw in a clarification too. Competency and a credential, those are words that mean different things. So this is actually less about the name of the credential, the name of the thing you earned, although we are talking about where you're earning the competency is how are you good at your job? Where did you learn how to do that? And moving forward, as we think about the future of the field, where can they go to get the support for their competencies? Those how do you know how to do this type thing.
Absolutely, absolutely. And this is where we balance. Are we talking about our profession as it exists today, or are we talking about the future profession?
Or both. Depends on what time of day it is.
Absolutely,
This is complicated stuff, but we're doing it together. So pathways, education, specializations, the task force has proposed 3 designations for one profession. That early childhood educator profession would have 3 designations. Can you tell us what that means and what is each of those? Who is each of those?
Correct. And this was an intentional decision by the task force that within the early childhood education profession, there will be 3 different levels of early childhood educators. And each level is prepared at a different depth and breadth. So ECE1 will be prepared by professional training programs. These are training programs that are at least 120 hours. Those training programs will have to align with the competencies at its appropriate level.
So not the patchwork that so many of us experience,
absolutely.
But a lot more intention.
Absolutely. These are training programs. These are not scattered credit hours from multiple sources. Certainly we can work on making sure that training can count towards these training programs, but just want to be very clear that this is an organized program of studies and not random clock hours here and there.
Right, not random adding up to 120 like so many of you experience and so many in our community wish it added up to something with even deeper meaning.
Absolutely, and these 120 could be earned through our community training program or through a higher education program. And it is typical that, or likely that these type of training programs will be the training programs you need to complete to be eligible for a credential, like the CDA credential. The second category is ECE2. ECE2 are prepared by associate degree programs in early childhood education. Again, this is not associate degree program in any other topic areas. These are specialized associate degree programs developed for early childhood educators that will be aligned with the competencies that are being developed. And then the third category of early childhood educators will be the ECE3, and those are individuals with bachelor's degrees in early childhood education or master's degree. And this is where it gets a little bit funky with these master's degree. There's a certain category of master's degree programs that are really for individuals with a bachelor's degree in another field who wants to enter in. So if I had a bachelor's degree in social work and wanted to be an early childhood educator, I could participate or attend these master's degree programs that will be giving me the learning opportunities, the coursework, the practicum experiences to allow me to meet the requirements of the ECE3.
And all of these designations are valued members of the profession.
Absolutely. ECE1 is a valued member of the profession as much as ECE3. The distinction there is based on their preparation. So if you receive more preparation, your designation, the level within the profession changes, so does your responsibility. More responsibilities, more preparation. Whereas right now, it's certainly not the same in many states where you can be an early childhood educator practicing in a home, like many of you, and whether you have an associate's degree or CDA or another state-level credential, your role is exactly the same. If you're receiving reimbursement for subsidy, your subsidy reimbursements are certainly the same. So this is saying absolutely not. If you have more preparation, you should have more responsibilities. And when we start making the case for compensation, you should have more compensation as well. So Mary Beth, I'm going to turn to you and ask you a few questions. As you can imagine, with 3, 4, and 5, there's a lot to unpack there. Certainly the levels within the profession, the various different types of preparation, making sure that family child care was included, because we know that often family child care providers are left out of some important conversations that impacts their practice. Can you tell a little bit more about how NAFCC contributed to the task force work of ensuring that family child care was considered in this process and the pieces you've elevated?
Sure. So NAFCC was so pleased to be invited to be a part of the task force because we are sure that family child care providers are part of the early childhood workforce, and we're trying to spread, like our mission says, the power of family child care. So we certainly appreciate the inclusion there. And at that table, we are trying to balance thoughtfully and vocally a balance between the here and now and the dream big, what could it be? And that's hard, and that's also kind of exciting, right? If we could have it any way that it ought to be, what would we do? But what does that mean for all of our other stuff? It is indeed hard as the National Association representing these providers. We don't just get to walk away from the here and now, right? The here and now of licensing, and the here and now of the feed program, and the here and now of all of the challenges and opportunities in our states. But I think that that's something that we've brought. Everything that we do is about building the supply of family child care, whether that's through our advocacy or through our work in accreditation or through our partnerships and professional development. We know that the National Survey of Early Childhood Education found that 1/3 of listed paid home-based child care providers had a degree, which was more than those researchers thought. And I think that's tremendous. We also know that we have members with high school diplomas. We have members with master's degrees. We know that the CDA, that Child Development Associate, has been huge for family child care. Family child care providers, early childhood educators working in family child care settings are not just one person, and that's part of the beauty of it too, and I think also contributes to why families choose family child care. But knowing that there's all of this mix out there and the realities of programs closing when they should be opening to meet the needs of families, and meanwhile we're having this credential and competency in all of these conversations, while our licensing standards, the most common thing is a few hours of training, and the states set the number of hours, and that looks different everywhere. And so we're trying to also balance we're trying to build something incredible on a floor that is shaky. I think part of what we're trying to do in part of the profession is also shore up the floor. This is very much foundational work, I think. Can you tell us what you see as the biggest reward for family child care providers in Power to the Profession, and what about the biggest risk for our community?
And I'll ask you the same question. Okay. Just to compare each other's sort of perspective on the risk and opportunities. I think the opportunity is great that we'll be able to define early childhood educators without being so focused on where they work, that in many ways we've further bifurcated an already fragmented profession by saying you educators working in a center, you're a different type of educators versus educators working in a home. So I think this opportunity to create one unifying way of talking about the early childhood education profession, so that if you're an early childhood educator working in a second grade classroom and I'm an early childhood educator working in a home-based program, we are seen as the same individual. The prestige that comes with that is shared prestige. The rewards that comes with that, like the case for compensation that we're going to make, we are both going to benefit from that. So having this common identity where we're not being devalued simply because we chose to operate in a home-based program versus an elementary school versus a center-based, I think it's important. Important win for the family child care provider community. And certainly that also has some risk. I mean, positive profession definitely has some risk, and we'll do our best we possibly can to mitigate these risks, but making sure that we're intentional about what is unique about family child care. I think in many conversations, just even the structure of family child care, like the fact that they're mixed-age children usually, or the fact that there is no supervision model that looks like a center-based program or elementary school, the principal and the assistant principal, et cetera. So just being cognizant of the unique nature of the practice of family child care providers will be important, ensuring that we maintain and even grow the diversity that we see in the family child care providers community, and to do so we have to be very intentional about the resources we provide to make sure that family child care providers have equitable access to the higher ed programs we were talking about, having equitable access to training programs, making sure that they're designed in a way that aligns with how family child care providers naturally operate. And so I think the risk there is making sure that all the resources and pathways we provide are equitable, and putting in resources intentionally for family child care providers will be important.
I think for us, one of the biggest rewards, one of the biggest opportunities is this task force saying that an early childhood educator can work across any of these settings, and this body, this very large body set insisting that family child care counts. And it's not just NAFCC and the family child care providers themselves saying we count. We are appreciative of this joint statement, if you will, that is this paper that says family child care counts. And we are here to say, yes, count us in on that. I think the risk is that what I worry about is who we might unintentionally leave out, who's going to get left behind. Across settings, the early childhood workforce has been asked to do so much with so little, because we get these ideas and these initiatives, but we don't fund them, or we don't design them in a meaningful way. We don't design them actually asking the practitioners themselves. This is supposed to be different from that, and we'll say more about that in a moment. But this is about lifting. This is about equity. This is about including all of family child care in all of our workforce conversations.
And I think that we also experience it as we're having conversations with multiple audiences, in addition to balancing the profession we have right now versus the future profession we all want to build. We're also balancing the need for the individuals in this profession as well as our commitment to young children. And there are times where we're going to have to make some hard decisions because of our commitment to young children, and balancing, trying to figure out, who are we making decisions for? Is it about young children, or is it about the individuals? Is it both? There are times it has to be about both.
Yeah.
Seems to be part of the conversation.
One of the things that we talk about a lot, and it doesn't make the answers easy, but if it's true that not just anybody can do this work with children birth to 8, if that's true, that there's something special, something that makes you competent, something that makes you part of the profession, this is about explaining what that something is. And short of that, just anybody can do this job, is not what we're going for. And I think because of the way we set up family child care licensing, and the details of that are an entirely different webinar, and we can do that another time. But in too many states, what we see is, anybody can do this, right? And my goodness, we know that that's not true. And so this is the task force trying to craft, here's what it does take, and here's who's coming, and in as inclusive a way as I think we can for what makes sense for children and families.
Absolutely. And I'll also say part of it is also who is making the decisions. That policy profession means that the profession is making the decisions about how we want this to be structured. So I'm sure you have lots of comments noted in your head, or you maybe wrote some down, but Mary Beth, I think family child care providers might have a lot to say about these recommendations. Where can they share their thoughts?
Well, I certainly hope that family child care providers have a lot to say about this. Where did you see yourself in 1 and 2 and 3? What's still missing that the task force needs to hear about? They need to hear from you. They need to hear from you directly, and they need to hear from you now. We have an opportunity to weigh in until April 30th. There will be additional opportunities in the weeks that follow, but the task force needs to be able to consider your input right away. So our intention with this radio show was to get you prepared to participate in a survey that asks some very specific questions. Do we want to hear from you generally? Absolutely. We want to hear your stories. We want to hear your questions. But answering the survey is the best way to get the attention of the members of the task force. So I hope that you will go to naeyc.org/profession. It's so important for you to take the opportunity to engage and take the survey today. Marica, thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary Beth, for this opportunity, and let's continue the conversation.
Thank you.